Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, pushing the envelope for human understanding and optimization, the podcast for podiatrists. The Pod of Inquiry is designed to empower you with knowledge. What happens from there is up to you. Your host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, has designed this show to take you down some very deep rabbit holes, hopefully bringing you back out again, relatively unscathed, but cerebrally whipped, enabling a better understanding of all things worthy of inquiry. If you have more questions after the show, then that is good. The new discovery today many times was the new discovery 50 years ago, only to be suppressed or plainly ignored. Medicine and surgery can sometimes take a long while to get their paradigm shifted. We hope to have a lot of fun on this show and maybe destroy some ridiculous dogma along the journey. Thanks for joining the show today. Let's start spelunking.
My guest today is Beth Shirley. Beth is a registered pharmacist and a certified clinical nutritionist who has developed a unique expertise as both a pharmacist and a certified clinical nutritionist. She's had a very distinguished 40-plus year career. She's been a pioneer at the cutting edge of the evolution of what has now come to be known as integrative pharmacy, the junction between traditional pharmacy and the use of clinical nutritional supplementation. Since 2009, Beth has worked in close collaboration with some of the world's leading thought leaders in the field of nitric oxide research. Through this, she has developed an in-depth knowledge on the topic and its potential beneficial applications in multiple aspects of patient care. In addition, she has worked closely with the scientific community and cutting-edge companies working on innovative nutritional ingredients and approaches to their use for a variety of life's metabolic challenges. In this episode, we get into the weeds a little bit about nitric oxide and all of the interplay it has with many other human physiological functions. So without any further introduction, please enjoy this very enlightening conversation I had with Beth Shirley. All right, I am here with Beth Shirley, who is a registered pharmacist and who I consider one of the experts in nitric oxide, and we're going to talk about some pretty cool stuff, and some of it's really kind of cutting edge as far as just when it's been published this year. So we'll get into that in a second. But before we do that, Beth, can you tell us a little bit, tell the audience how you got interested in this subject matter?
Sure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
I became a pharmacist because I thought I was going to help people. Okay. And after 20 years of seeing people come back sicker and sicker on more and more drugs, in 1997, I became a certified clinical nutritionist.
Okay.
So I became the pharmacist to go to if you wanted to get off drugs or not go down that road to begin with. And I also started monthly women's health seminars where I was teaching women how to change their lifestyle, change their nutrition, incorporate bioidentical hormones. And I did this monthly for about 15 years.
You know, that's kind of interesting because I've interviewed a lot of functional medicine physicians, and invariably when I ask them that question of how they got into their space, they always have a story. Sometimes it's a personal family member story or even themselves that, you know, regular medicine wasn't working for me and I had to find some, you know, better way to treat it. And so that's not that unique of a story, I think, when you have very bright people that look at things and say, wait a second, it's supposed to be better than this, right?
Yep. Yep. And definitely it came from not finding answers for myself in the allopathic realm.
Right. So what was the trigger that got you into the nitric oxide arena?
In 2009, I helped formulate and distribute and educate about nitric oxide. I was associated with, it was called Neogenis at the time, the human.
Okay.
The Neo 40 lozenge.
Okay.
So these people were really close to my pharmacy. So, you know, that I got to be friends with them, and then we just started to share information and go from there.
So then once you kind of got introduced to these folks that were interested in it, combined with your biochemical knowledge and everything, you just started looking at it and then saying, well, this is kind of an interesting molecule.
It's very interesting. It touches every single physiological process, every single one of them.
And that, the more I read about it, the more I'm fascinated that there are other molecules that have this very diverse effect on multiple biochemical pathways. And, take vitamin D, for example, it seems to touch a lot of different enzymes and that type of thing. But nitric oxide to me seems like it's really one of the most diverse molecules of human physiology from all of the different things that it does.
Touches everything, the cardiovascular system. It governs circulation and microcirculation, our brain, our neurological system, our learning, our memory. Our kidneys are so dependent on good microcirculation. Our eyes, our vision, our hormones, all of our hormones, all of our sexual hormones actually need nitric oxide for the precursor molecules, for the gonadotropin releasing hormone, is how it all gets started, and it's nitric oxide dependent.
So so let me interrupt you for a second. So if, for example, you thought about the fact that there's bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. We know that testosterone in males tends to decrease dramatically over, the aging process, as does nitric oxide. I think there's something in some of the writings. What is it, about 50% is reduced by the time you're age 40?
By the time you're 40, our ability to make nitric oxide through that NOS enzyme, nitric oxide synthase, decreases to about 50%. And then by the time we're 60, it's only about 15%.
So just talking about the cardioprotective benefits of nitric oxide,
right.
It's so critical, but yet it's so depleted in that time frame, the window of cardiovascular disaster, let's call it, when you're mid 50s and on, when you need it even more. So that's kind of interesting. But you mentioned something that I personally need more of an explanation of. And you can help us out with that, I'm sure, as well as the audience. But when you look at some of the literature, you'll see iNOS, eNOS, nNOS. Can you explain to the audience some of the differences in these nitric oxide synthetase? I guess they are isomers.
They're all NOS enzymes. Only they're found in different places, and they do different things. Like eNOS, endothelial NOS.
Right.
Okay, this governs your circulation and microcirculation. There's a nNOS, neuronal NOS, and it is mainly concentrated in the brain and the neurological system.
Okay.
And then there's iNOS, and that's inducible NOS. And this is the NOS that is used for our immune function. This is our NOS that is stimulated by any kind of pathogen.
So are these, help me out here, because are they the exact same molecular structure that they're just produced in different areas, or is it a little bit different molecule?
It's just a little different, but not that much.
Okay.
Okay. So the iNOS is inducible and is not calcium dependent. The eNOS and the nNOS are calcium calmodulin dependent.
So as we get older, eNOS, which is the endovascular, the one that resides in the endothelium of the vascular system, it decreases, correct?
Right.
What about iNOS?
Well, the thing is oxidative stress. So any kind of free radicals, oxidative stress from EMF, oxidative stress from anything, like any kind of, most anything in our environment increases free radicals, increases oxidative stress. Oxidative stress uncouples NOS. Okay. So NOS is a dimer.
All right.
and it's held together by BH4, tetrahydrobiopterin.
Okay.
Oxidative stress uncouples that NOS. And when NOS is uncoupled, it becomes a superoxide generator, not a nitric oxide producer.
Okay.
So under oxidative stress, you're stimulating the NOS enzyme. However, you're not making nitric oxide. You're making superoxide.
Which is something you might not want to have a bunch of.
No, because the oxidative stress in this kind of environment comes everywhere.
Going back to the eNOS, primarily the eNOS is the one that is depleted as we age, or are they all?
Well, they all can be uncoupled.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. But when we're supplementing to replete our depletion, we are actually probably not supplementing directly to eNOS, right? It would be more of the other structures, or would it actually be an eNOS for the way you termed it at Eimer?
Well, nitrate, it's all of them.
Okay.
The nitrate can actually help increase the production of BH4, which helps couple NOS. So it makes all the NOS function better.
All right.
Tetrahydrobiopterin, the BH4, keeps that NOS coupled. But tetrahydrofolate, this can help keep NOS coupled because this helps make your BH4.
All right. Where's BH4 produced? In the liver?
I don't know.
Okay. I mean, it could be produced in the resident tissue or some other place and gets transported to the resident tissue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever
had
researched
that question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if you haven't had a knucklehead like me interview that has such a primitive understanding that would formulate a question like that. But all right, so we're going to talk about then I guess let's go into the supplementation process, because there's a lot of I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and what the supplementation process really is about, why it's so important. I mean, we are recommending that every one of our patients over age 40 are supplemented, and that it's an ongoing thing. But go ahead.
Yeah, but not only just over 40, anybody with any kind of chronic issue.
Right, right.
So pretty much anybody that's sitting in front of you.
Right. And that's what's so powerful about the testing strips, because within a matter of a few seconds, you can see whether you're depleted or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Because even some of the most popular medications, these uncouple that NOS enzyme.
Give me an example.
Antibiotics.
Okay.
SSRI antidepressants. The azole antifungals, which are so popular now because of the mold community.
Right.
Okay. NSAIDs, your ibuprofen.
Okay.
Birth control pills. That's why they don't like women over the age of 35 taking the birth control pills, and especially not smokers.
Right.
It's because of that cardiovascular complication.
The high incidence of thrombogenesis. Yeah, for sure.
And strokes and stuff.
Right.
PPIs, proton pump inhibitors.
Right.
These inhibit the production of nitric oxide through both pathways. And when these were first put on the market back in the early 90s, insurance only paid for a 6-week supply. They knew that this was not a long-term type of medication people should be on. Right. But now people have been on them for decades. They're over the counter. People take them like candy.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the great misunderstandings, at least in the patient population with proton pump inhibitors, because they don't understand that, okay, it changes the ability for your natural gastric secretions to complete a lot of these chemical reactions, for lack of a better way to put it. Nitric oxide being one of them, right? I mean, if you're taking a proton pump inhibitor, that's going to decrease more of the ability for you to change things with a nitric oxide supplement. So that then you maybe need to go to a lozenge.
More than likely.
Yeah.
Or work with somebody and have them change their diet and get off some of these foods that are inhibiting their physiological process.
So a lot of people are, I think, under the assumption that when you take these proton pump inhibitors, all it does is it just kind of neutralizes the pH to a point where they don't have the reflux symptoms. But I don't think they understand that it actually blocks your production of nitric oxide through that pathway.
Both pathways.
So explain that.
Okay. Well, it changes the pH of the stomach so that with nitrate supplementation with nitrate, we consume the nitrates, they get absorbed, they circulate around, they get concentrated in the salivary glands. Salivary glands release the nitrate. We've got good anaerobic bacteria on our tongue that will reduce the nitrate to nitrite.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
We know that these proton pump inhibitors actually change pH.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But then we swallow the nitrite, and in the acidic environment of the stomach, some of that nitrite gets reduced further to nitric oxide. Okay. So with the PPIs, you don't have that acidity there.
Right. So you're not going to convert it.
Right.
So you talk about the other pathways. The other pathway, just more of a sublingual systemic distribution of the nitrate into the, I don't understand that other pathway. I understand if you eat a nitrate, you convert it in your mouth with your oral microbiome into a nitrite. The nitrite goes down into the stomach, and if it's proper pH, then it's converted into nitric oxide. But explain the other pathway to me.
The NOS pathway?
Well, you said it interrupts both pathways. What did you mean by
the NOS, the
Yeah.
arginine NOS pathway. That's where the arginine is fed into the nitric oxide synthase enzyme to make your nitric oxide.
Okay.
So the PPIs increase the production of what's called ADMA, asymmetric dimethylarginine.
Okay.
And this asymmetric dimethylarginine inhibits that NOS enzyme.
All right. So then when you're talking about the PPIs messing up both pathways, that's what you're referring to.
Right.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So I guess we could jump around a little bit, but let's talk about some of the other physiological effects. We know that nitric oxide is very important to help offload oxygen from the hemoglobin molecule.
Right. Nitric oxide needs to be connected to the hemoglobin molecule in order for it to deliver oxygen. You could be super saturated with oxygen, and if you're nitric oxide deficient, you're not going to be able to deliver that oxygen to the cells and tissues.
So that's two things that are going on in the endovascular system. If we're depleted in nitric oxide, it's going to affect the small muscle. We're not going to have as much vasodilation. And then it also affects these cells that are carrying this important oxygen to our tissues. So there's two things going on. So it's kind of like affecting the pipe and affecting the water that's running through the pipe.
Right. Because the cells can't be more than 2 cells away from a functioning microcapillary.
Wait, say that again?
The cells need to be like 2 or less cells away from a functioning microcapillary in order to be able to be fed the oxygen, glucose, and nutrients.
Okay.
So if that microcapillary isn't functioning correctly, then you're going to have cellular damage, cellular death.
Right. And all tissues that are pathologic seem to have an impairment of vascular perfusion.
Right.
So it would be almost.
It's not only feeding these cells, it's also clearing away the cellular debris too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both.
Now, what about some of the other effects of nitric oxide that you'll read about, how it seems to maybe increase the ability of us to, not be maybe as insulin resistant, and let's talk about that a little bit.
All right. There's a GLUT4 receptor on the cell.
Right.
And it needs nitric oxide to be attached to it in order to translocate and bring glucose into the cell.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're nitric oxide deficient, your blood sugar will not be good.
Well, and the other thing is, I would imagine if you're impairing the GLUT4, body's going to react to that and saying, hey, I'm not getting enough glucose in for ATP production and whatnot. So I need to produce more insulin to try to help get this glucose through the cell wall. And then we know that high insulin levels, chronic high insulin levels, are highly associated with a lot of bad things that go on in human physiology.
It increases oxidative stress tremendously. Okay. And that oxidative stress then uncouples that NOS. So then you've got more oxidative stress being produced, less nitric oxide. So you're on this really bad, vicious cycle. So that's why the insulin resistance is so connected to cardiovascular disease.
And therefore, that might explain why the preponderance of cardiovascular disease is so much higher and significant in the type 2 diabetic population versus the non-diabetic population.
Exactly.
Same thing with cancers.
Yep.
So that's pretty interesting. So I think you could make the statement. Do you think this is a fair statement that anybody with type 2 diabetes should probably be on nitric oxide supplementation? Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. Yes.
Right. So if you're above,
anybody with insulin resistance,
right,
PCOS, obstructive sleep apnea.
Oh, that makes sense, right?
Okay, because that's connected
right
to cardiometabolic disease. Okay, anybody living in this EMF crazy world.
And now a message from our sponsor. Well, folks, if you're over 40 and you're not using a supplement to augment nitric oxide production, you should really rethink that. This molecule is absolutely imperative to health, not to mention the cardioprotection. Nitric oxide is a physiological molecule that does so many things for your health. I never miss a day of nitric oxide supplementation. That's how important it is. Long overdue, there is now a nitric oxide replenishment formula without the fear of oxalates. Approved Medical Solutions does not use beets, spinach, or arginine. Approved Medical Solutions is proud to offer our audience their oxalate-free nitric oxide formula. If you are not a healthcare provider, you can still get started by going to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and use the code SBarrett at checkout, and you will receive a 10% medical discount savings. For licensed practitioners, just go to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and register. They have unique bundles for all of the full-fledged spelunkers of the Pod of Inquiry. Use Pod of Inquiry at checkout after registration, and I am certain you will be pleased not only for yourself, but for all of your patients. Here's a little secret. If you order their testing strips and test every patient for a few clinic days, you will see that nearly every one of them will be deficient. When they see this result, they will want you to start them on it immediately. Now, thanks to Approved Medical Solutions, you can give them the best care without the worry of oxalates. Thanks for watching. You can start today. Yeah, you know what, Beth? I don't understand EMF. You know, I mean, at first when I heard that, it's like, that's just, it sounds so woo-woo. You know, it's like, you know, because you can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't touch it. Right. But then as you hang around in the biohacking sphere for a while, more and more people are talking about what the negative effects of EMF are. Is it just that it impairs mitochondrial function and energy production? What's going on with EMF?
EMF increases oxidative stress. EMF stimulates this enzyme called NADPH oxidase.
Okay.
This enzyme's only job is to make superoxide.
All right.
However, when this enzyme gets upregulated, it will preferentially steal that NADPH from other necessary processes. And one of the necessary processes that uses NADPH is that NOS enzyme.
All right. And so,
And it's also needed to recycle your glutathione.
okay.
But this NADPH oxidase enzyme is the base of how the EMF damages it. But like you said, you can't feel it.
Right.
It doesn't produce heat. So this is the way the government has been able to say there really isn't any proof that it causes damage because it's not causing heat. However, they knew in the 60s that this radiation, EMF, increases cardiovascular disease, increases diabetes. They knew this.
What's the biggest source of EMF exposure to the average day-to-day person? Is it their cell phone up by their head?
Yeah, that's a bad one. And and Wi-Fi. It's everywhere.
Okay.
Okay, in Austin, we have 5G.
Right.
So you walk out the door, it's everywhere.
So is it, and again, there's a lot of controversy about the 5G versus the 4G and all of this. It in your mind, that's a pretty significant step up in, for lack of a better word, toxicity?
Yeah, it is.
But the beautiful,
the beautiful
thing. Is it just power? Is it just because it's a higher power, or what is that? Higher frequency?
Yeah, it's the energy waves.
Okay.
It's the energy waves.
You were going to go on with something before I interrupted you.
That's okay. But see, the beautiful thing about nitrate, though, like by supporting that nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide pathway, nitrate downregulates that NADPH oxidase enzyme.
All right.
Okay, so you're downregulating the damaging effects of the EMF by supporting that pathway.
And when you're supplementing, I would imagine if you're supplementing with nitrates for your nitric oxide to help protect you a little bit with the EMF, I would imagine the same thing could be said with some glutathione as well, some of the other antioxidants, or do you find those not really a big player in that role?
I have my own theories on the glutathione.
Okay. All right.
I'm a big antioxidant person. My favorite antioxidant is actually ergothioneine.
And what is that?
Ergothioneine is the only antioxidant that has its own transporter to take it within the cell.
Okay.
Okay.
And is it a constituent or a downstream product of glutathione, or upstream?
No, it's not. It's completely separate. It's completely separate. And actually, there's a lot of studies showing now that melatonin is actually more critical than even glutathione.
Wow. Because usually a lot of people only think about melatonin for sleep, but we know that it's a pretty broad spectrum hormone as well. There's some stuff in there that, in the literature where, and we'll probably talk about this when we talk about methylene blue and more about, my brain just went blank. I need a little bit more nitric oxide, but I guess what I was going to say is there's talk about this term called hormesis, and what is a hormetic effect? Can you explain that to the audience? Because I think that's a really important concept.
Right. And this is kind of the basis of the methylene blue. Mm-hmm. So on the methylene blue, low dose. And then if you keep going higher and higher, you're actually can be causing some of the issues that you want to be addressing. Okay. So it's like it's a bell curve. So with methylene blue, you always want to be kind of on, the upside of the bell curve, not at the top and not on the other side.
Right. And so for my understanding, I always thought of hormesis as basically, I guess some people will even say exercise can have a hormetic effect where,
exactly.
And I guess, is that maybe the crux of what some of the homeopathy foundational tenets are based on?
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very well, with homeopathy, there actually isn't even any molecules of the original product. It's energetic.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
it's energetic signatures of whatever that. And I'm really, attuned to homeopathy. I mean, this is something that actually helped me when I was really, really sick.
Yeah, I think it, a lot of people that really throw a lot of rocks at homeopathy, one of their biggest claims is, well, it's not a drug that has any, effective dosage. And so therefore it can't be any good. It'd be like throwing one drop of acid into a giant Olympic-sized swimming pool. It's not going to change the pH of that entire pool. So help us out with that.
It's energetic signatures.
And what is an energetic signature?
It's like kind of, I don't know. I was thinking maybe like those studies that show if you speak differently to water, you have different crystals that are formed. So it's this energetic signature. So I got really, really sick about 10 years ago. And all of the stuff that I've learned, being in functional medicine since 97 was actually making me sicker, even the IV glutathione and things like that. And it wasn't until we started using some homeopathy that allowed my body to start releasing some of these chemicals.
Okay.
So we were not giving me any particular, there was no drug, there was no herb or anything like that. It was just energetic signals from plants or all kinds of things to allow my body. There's so much that we don't know about energy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, if you want to talk about energy, you'd start looking at some of the things that they're looking at different tissues and how energy is transported through fascia, for example, and some of these very interesting things. And it's so far out of our day-to-day understanding and maybe even our day-to-day awareness that, I think that'll be a lot of investigation ongoing. It kind of leads me into what I wanted to talk to you about too. Brown fat versus yellow fat, because I just got a little paper that you all were kind enough to forward to me about some of the stuff that they're doing over at University of Alabama in Birmingham, talking about sustained release of nitric oxide, where they developed this liposomal subcutaneous concoction recipe for mice, and they saw a lot of cool things that happened with that. So let's talk about that for a second.
Well, the white fat is where we're storing the fat, storing all this energy.
Right.
The brown fat, actually, it's thermogenic. It actually can help you burn energy. And by supporting the nitric oxide, you're actually stimulating this brown fat to help you burn the energy.
So the brown fat plays a role in some of the stuff that you'll read about with some of these cold plunges and heat shock and cold shock proteins and that type of thing.
Yep.
What's the understanding of the nitric oxide in the mice that they gave to, compared to the control, the mice that got the subcutaneous liposomal recipe, they seem to have on the same diet after 12 weeks, they gained about 17% less body weight. And it was also a good body weight because it wasn't, a muscle loss thing like you have with semaglutide where, great, guy lost 10 pounds, but 8 of that was muscle. That's no good,
Right.
So what happened there, and what's the function of the nitric oxide playing with is it just upregulating the brown fat, or is it making more of the brown fat? What's going on there?
It's making more of it. So it's upregulating the production of the brown fat, but it's also improving the glucose, your utilization of your glucose. And it's improving your insulin utilization. So you're not so insulin resistant. So it's all down that cardiometabolic pathway.
Okay. So is it converting regular adipose tissue that we wouldn't term brown into brown, or is it a de novo genesis of a new type of fat?
They think it's converting the white fat to the brown fat.
Okay. All right. Well, that's very interesting. And then they also showed in these mice that got the liposomal nitric oxide concoction, they showed that they had increased cerebral blood flow and significantly improved learning abilities. So I think then that takes us into the neurocognitive space, which, I think everybody gets it. Nitric oxide, peripheral arterial disease. I think that's pretty well established in the understanding of most physicians, but I don't think it is in the neurocognitive world and in the neuronal world of how the nitric oxide is playing a role, not just necessarily from the blood flow, but
right. But our brains, even though they're only about 2% of our body weight, they consume 20% of our oxygen that we take in. You've got to have that microcirculation open in order to be able to deliver that necessary oxygen. And when we're thinking, when we're trying to problem solve, when we're learning, this is metabolically active tissue.
Right.
So that means there's an increased need for ATP, increased need for oxygen, increased need for glucose.
Mm-hmm.
So that microcirculation has to be open.
Right. But in addition to the microcirculation being improved, there's also these other, I'll call them tangential metabolic benefits as well, as far as the energy production, what's going on with everything. So it's not just this one pathway of I'm opening up the river so more water's going down the river, or opening up the dam. I mean, there's a lot of other things at play. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then I think to think of it from a brain standpoint, because I think you made an excellent point about, energy demand, that type of thing. I mean, the brain probably is not so dissimilar to skeletal muscle, because as we're exercising skeletal muscle, it requires more nutrients, molecules, all of these other things, because in order for that muscle to function, it's just requiring more to be delivered to it, more oxygen, and that type of thing. And same thing with, cognitive processes and that type of thing. And a lot of the neuroimaging that is being done today is based on that premise of how much blood flow is being taken up, or how much is increased in that area. So it makes a lot of sense. So,
and with the muscles, this is one of our biggest storage places of nitrate and nitrite.
Interesting.
Because the myoglobin can actually reduce nitrite to nitric oxide on an as-needed basis. So when you're exercising, the muscles can actually make more nitric oxide in order to open up that microcirculation.
Oh, see, that's really interesting, because I knew that you could increase nitric oxide production with exercise, but I thought it had to do more with, because of the increase in maybe the turbulence or the speed that the blood was flowing through the arteries and stimulating these cells in the endothelium, in the endovascular endothelium, that was the only mechanism. But you're saying there's also a muscular effect as well.
Right.
Oh, that's very cool. That's the nugget worth listening to the whole show right there. So I guess the take-home message for the people is that when you're on the treadmill running or lifting weights, you should be doing some cognitive things too, and get all these muscles going.
That's a good idea.
The one between your ears and the one on your deltoids or biceps or whatever. So, Beth, if you were going to explain to a patient in very simple terms, maybe 5 bullet points of why you really need to be supplementing with nitric oxide. And I will tell everybody there's like two things that I'll never miss in a day, and that's my fish oil and my nitric oxide supplementation, because I think those two things are like pretty much inherent to being able to fight all of these bad things that try to kill us so much, like cardiovascular disease. But what would you tell the patient? What's some of the take-home points for a patient that here's why you need to do this? Because they may not necessarily, if they start a supplement, they may not necessarily feel something discernible. So what would you say there for that?
A lot of times, though, when you start a nitrate supplement, you actually do feel it because you are opening up that circulation in the brain.
Okay.
However, cardiovascular disease is still the #1 killer.
Right.
Okay. And diabetes. You want to keep that blood sugar healthy.
Right.
How about keeping your sex life healthy?
There you go.
Okay. Because usually ED is one of the first signs of cardiovascular disease.
It's right. That's true.
Okay. But it's sexual dysfunction in both men and women. Us women need it too, in order to be able to have that circulation down there.
One of the things, so one of the things, I think you made a great point that some people do feel it when you put them on it. I think there's two things that can reinforce that. One is if you don't believe that it will help you and you're doing an exercise routine on a daily basis or 3 or 4 days a week basis or whatever it is, if you will supplement yourself for nitric oxide production at some point before that run, invariably you will see a better exercise performance. And so you can see it tangentially right there. And then the other thing is the testing strips.
Right. Yeah, nitric oxide actually increases the endurance and the intensity that you can do. The strips. Pardon?
Oh, I was going to say, is that due solely to the vasodilation and the offloading of the oxygen from the heme molecule, or is there some other factors that are playing into that as well?
Well, it's also being like clearing away the debris, like the lactate, clearing away the debris from these muscles that are exercising.
That's a good point, because if somebody's lifting a lot of weights or like doing lower body and they get a lot of lactate buildup, they should try that and they'll see, because I've noticed that personally, that there's much less lactic acid buildup after I supplement right before a session of weightlifting.
Right.
Interesting.
And the test strips are testing the nitrite concentration of your saliva. So the nitrite is the immediate precursor to your nitric oxide.
Right.
So if you do some nitrates, either with supplements or with the high nitrate foods, about an hour and a half later, test yourself and see how pink that got.
Right. Yeah. And then test yourself the next morning and see how it goes down, and then how you need to reload it. That's one of the great things about nitric oxide supplementation is the test strips. Really, patients need metrics sometimes. It's like you show them what their A1C is all the time. You show them these different things. They can look at that. They can understand that. And that testing strip provides a lot of power to them, I think, for knowing.
Because how many times do you give somebody something and they just take it because they trust what you're saying?
Right.
They can't feel it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, Beth, I want to thank you so much for coming on and giving some of your, I know it's just a little tidbit of your expertise, because your expertise in this subject matter is so huge, but I think it's one of those things where the more it gets talked about, and especially when we get somebody like you with your expertise to come on and kind of distill it down, I think it just makes a lot of sense. So I want to thank you for taking the time to do that. And I look forward to talking to you in the future about methylene blue and its relationship with nitric oxide.
Right. Yeah. Supporting your nitric oxide will not be the only thing you do, but it needs to be the base of everything you do.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Because if you have impaired circulation or microcirculation, it doesn't really matter what else you're doing, what else you're taking. It's not going to be able to get to where it needs to go.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. It's kind of like the subway to get everybody all over their tissue locations and that type of thing. So, well, super. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you in the very near future.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Several years ago, I chose Alpinion as my ultrasound brand of choice after years of experience and research into ultrasound imaging. In fact, I have 2 of their machines. Alpinion has incredible precision and penetration built into their technology that, in my opinion, is simply the best value in all of the ultrasound imaging space. They have several price points to meet your needs, and I can tell you definitively that you'll end up having to pay double to achieve the equivalent imaging quality from other top brands. That doesn't even account for the unlimited software updates and remote tech support included with no monthly fees. Right now, to show their appreciation for the listeners of the Pod of Inquiry, they're offering an incredible discount. Their portable i7 retails for $21,000, but you can get it discounted at most medical meetings for $19,000. But my listeners will get it discounted to $15,900. This has never been offered anywhere for the new portable system with the engine of a console system. Use code SBPOI to take advantage of this incredible offer. You won't be disappointed with Alpinion. I sure haven't been.
We hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes, found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If this incredible and educational conversation has tickled just a little bit of your cortex, please leave us a review and spread the message to your friends and colleagues. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.